Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Eric. Good morning, John. JT, I nearly read your name off the chat. Good morning. Hi, Matt. I guess we can just hang out and wait and see when a few more people gather and begin then. Oh, hi, Julia. Welcome. We're going to wait just another minute or so while we all gather. Julia and Matt would both like to hear how everyone is doing. So I can share what I'm been up to, or I can make obnoxious comments to stimulate other people's responses. I can say, well, JT decided to become a trapeze artist at the circus, so he's run away to join circus school. His kiddies are really missing him. Let's see if JT corrects me in the chat, because actually I just made that up. Oh, yes, I was very aware that, as Matt says, as soon as you say something on the internet, it is taken for truth. And I hasten to add that I had been only making things up, but it's quite possible that somebody could, take a slice of what I said and and so the myth of JT's circus trapeze career takes off. Oh, JT celebrated his anniversary, his and Charles's anniversary yesterday. Now there's a few more people gathered, and so I'm going to begin. Good morning. Hello. Welcome to Virtual Church School. Today we're going to be talking about neighborhoods and what Jesus's neighborhood was like when he was growing up. So I have a question for you. If you had to pick one word or two or three to describe your neighborhood when you were growing up, or what your neighborhood is like right now, let me know in the chat. Good morning, Marion. Good morning, Kim. If I haven't said good morning to you, it's because I didn't see your name in the chat. So I can start about my neighborhood. I can give you some words to describe it. My neighborhood growing up. Busy, interesting, and broken concrete. That's what it was like. Except then I moved while I was still a kid, and the neighborhood word to describe it, or words, would definitely have changed. If anybody would like to pick a word or a couple of words to describe their neighborhood growing up, please type it in the chat. I like Julia's words. So for one of her neighborhoods growing up, she said white suburban. And then for the next neighborhood, she said beach, warm, happy. Wow, two really different sounding neighborhoods. Marion's word for her neighborhood growing up was we, and that was his neighborhood growing up, and his neighborhood now, quiet. JT's childhood neighborhood was Large lots, few children, hilly, and not much interaction. Ah, Matt's neighborhood is playing outside with friends. That sounds very nice. Okay. Oh, JT's neighborhood had a pond and a creek to play with. I played outside a lot too as a kid and with other kids. But it was very urban. Um, we climbed chain link fences. There was stickball. Um, there were lots of construction sites, and I managed to get in trouble at one of them just with getting hurt. Kim's neighborhood right now she describes as being quiet and distant from other neighborhoods. Okay, well, I am now going to ring the bell to start. Oh, there's the bell. As it dies away, I'm going to lift my finger up, and you can do this at home if you'd like. So now it's time for our story. Here in Virtual Church School, we have been talking about some of the places Jesus lived in when he was a baby and a kid. Jesus' parents, Mary and Joseph, didn't come from the same town. Maybe your parents also did not come from the same town. Mine certainly didn't. You can ask your parents sometime what towns they came from or what their neighborhood was like when they were growing up. Mary came from Nazareth in Galilee, and Joseph came from Bethlehem in Judea. Both Galilee and Judea were parts of the country of Israel. Mary and Joseph got married in Nazareth, but they came to Bethlehem because the ruler of the country ordered it because of something called a census. And so Jesus ended up being born in Bethlehem. Now, because the ruler was bad, Jesus and his family became refugees in a different country. When Jesus was 3 years old, the bad ruler died, and Jesus' family came back to Israel. But they didn't want to go back to Bethlehem because there was another bad ruler there. So instead, they went back to Nazareth. And Jesus, who had spent his first few years in Egypt, then spent the most of the rest of his growing up in Nazareth. Now, you might be thinking that what with Jesus growing up there, Nazareth might be a cool town. You might think that the word one would use to describe Jesus' hometown might be some word like great or awesome or nice. But no, the best you could say about Nazareth back then was so-so or meh or could be worse. Nazareth was an ordinary town in the middle of nowhere. There's some evidence that the folks who lived there were very particular about keeping the rules strictly. Archaeologists have found far more artifacts connected with religious rule keeping there than in nearby places. For example, special dishes carved out of stone instead of most of them being made out of pottery clay. There's another interesting thing about Nazareth. It's cellars. Cellar is another word for basement. Maybe some of you live in a house with a basement, or maybe you live in an apartment, but there isn't a basement in your building. Back when Jesus was growing up, many houses and nearby places didn't have cellars, but Nazareth did. Here is a picture of an archaeologist inside one of Nazareth's cellars. This is happening in the current day. I think the picture might have been taken last year, and the archaeologist is down in the basement from biblical times. The people who lived there kept their pantry goods and other supplies in the cellar. And they dug a second set of cellars below the first set, and then a third set of cellars below those. And all the cellars were interconnected. Later on, after Jesus had lived there and moved away, a terrible war happened, and the people used the cellars to hide in from the violence that the war brought. But before the war, Jesus was growing up in Nazareth. And here is a picture of what Nazareth might have looked like when Jesus was living there. So here is a building that is cut away so you can see inside, and there's columns in it. That was probably the synagogue. And it has columns because so many people gathered inside that it needed to be a big space, and the columns kept it up. Do you remember when we were meeting back in church? Our church sanctuary has columns in it too. Over here are some people preparing food or laying it out on the roof. In biblical towns like these, the two most in Judea and Israel and Galilee, the two of the most important spots in the town were the synagogue and the well where water came from. You can see how it was so dry here that water is very important, extra important. And I have a picture here of what Nazareth looks like today. This big, imposing building here is the Church of the Annunciation, a Catholic church built, I think in the second or, I don't remember what century, built by traditionally in the spot where the Annunciation happened and Mary spoke with the angel Gabriel. Oh, yes, I can happily put the link in the chat to the story of the archaeologist. That story comes from, what is it? I said I could easily put it in, but it's the Hebrew Times, I think. The Times of Israel. Sorry, there's so many newspapers I read nowadays that it's hard to keep them all straight. But I'm putting the link here. And one of the interesting things about this link is that in researching Nazareth, I found a lot of conflicting accounts and some extremely dubious references. And I was also surprised at how difficult it was to find this story about cutting edge archaeology happening right now. I mean, I believe the story was published last summer, and it was buried on Google page 4. After many, many pages that were full of dubious ideas and dubious websites. So that I found interesting. I also found it interesting that the archaeologist in this story was a woman, and all the archaeology sites that were more sort of respectable seeming were stories of men archaeologists whose archaeological digs and studies had happened decades ago. So I just thought it was interesting the way Google ranked some of these sources of information. But to get back to our story, back in the time of Jesus. So when Jesus grew up, it was time for him to teach people about God. So he left his hometown and he left Galilee, the whole area, and traveled to Judea, where his cousin John was baptizing people in the Jordan River. And Jesus got baptized by John. Jesus stayed a while near the Jordan River before returning home to Galilee. And people came to listen to him speak and got to know him a bit and started to follow him. Some of these were John's friends, like a guy called Philip. When Jesus got ready to return to Galilee, he invited his new friends like Philip to come with him. Philip went off to tell his friend Nathanael. He said to his friend, "Hey, Nathanael, guess what? That cousin of John's called Jesus, that one from Nazareth? Well, he's the one all the prophecies are about. I know you're big into Moses and the prophets, and so you'll be really interested to hear this. He's heading back home to Nazareth, and he's inviting others to come along. I'm going with him. Want to come too?" But Nathanael was like, I don't know. This guy is from that no-account place called Nazareth. That is one sad, sorry place. Can anything good come from a place like that? I don't think so. So Philip said, "Okay, you just have to come meet him for yourself. Come on." Wow. Can you imagine being invited to go meet Jesus? What's going to happen? Do you think it will be bad or good? Do you think anything good could come from a not-so-great town like Nazareth? Philip brought his friend Nathanael to meet Jesus, and the first thing Jesus said was, "Look, here's someone in whom there is no deceit." Now, Nathanael was an honest guy, and he never tried to deceive anybody or pretend he was something he wasn't. But he didn't see how Jesus could have known that about him. So, being honest and straightforward, he asked Jesus, "How do you know about me?" And Jesus told him that he saw him under a fig tree before Philip came to talk to him. Only Jesus and Nathanael knew what Nathanael was doing under the fig tree. Maybe he was just resting in the shade, or maybe he was thinking through a personal problem. Maybe he was taking a nap, or maybe he was praying. Anyway, Nathanael was really surprised at Jesus' words. So surprised. And he said, "Wow, you really are the Son of God and the King of Israel, just like Moses and the prophets talked about. I'm coming with you." Seeing some really amazing things. And so Jesus and his new friends all went to Galilee together. And you'll find out what happened next in another story. But now I have some questions for you. What do you think Nathanael was doing under that fig tree? If you have any idea, you can type your answer in the chat. you can think about what would you be doing if you found yourself under a fig tree. And I can share that I once lived in a house with a really big fig tree in the backyard. This was in California. And I love Matt's answer of what he would be doing under the fig tree. He'd be doom scrolling. Julia would be playing with bugs. That's excellent. I do both those things. When I lived in the house that had the fig tree, what I would do is I would go there to be happy for a little while because it was a really big and lovely fig tree. It had great tasting figs during fig season, and there were big branches that were spread out really low, and you could just walk along them like paths. Oh, JT would be standing there wondering when the figs would be ripe because he loves figs. So do I, JT. One time, I think when we were meeting in person at church school, I think it was Aletha, who brought in fresh figs for the kids to try. Eric would be pondering all the stuff that's happening and while munching on the ripe figs. Yeah, fig eating. Really good idea. Oh, Marion, did you live in Palo Alto? The house I lived in with the fig tree was next door in Mountain View. So we're starting to think about neighborhoods again, and I have some questions about how you feel about neighborhoods. If you came to my neighborhood and you thought it was awful, would you think I was awful too? Jesus said she would be reading under the fig tree. Good idea too. Then you could grab a snack in between reading or chapters. What if my neighborhood was really, really boring? Every house looked exactly the same. Would you think I was boring? What if my neighborhood was really nice and pretty? Would you think I was nice too? What if my neighborhood was terrible? Would you think I was terrible too? Oh, Patrick is going to be reading under the fig tree also. Yeah. So would you think that I was like the neighborhood I came from? It seems as though Nathaniel thought Jesus would be just like his neighborhood, which would be kind of like, nah. But in fact, Jesus was the opposite of that. What if Jesus had grown up in your neighborhood? Would he be more like you? What if you had grown up in Jesus's neighborhood? Would you be more like him? Is everyone in your neighborhood the same? You can write any answers you can think of in the chat. You can write in the chat what it's like to meet someone from a different neighborhood. Oh, Patrick agrees that people don't have control over their neighborhood. Sometimes they try to, and depending on how they try to have control over their neighborhood, things can work out well or not well. Marion is saying that some neighborhoods look alike when they are first built, but then they start changing. Yeah, because they grow, and there's Jesus also traveled a lot when he was young. He had been a refugee in Egypt, and his parents took him on at least one trip to the big city of Jerusalem. And I think he probably went to visit his cousin John's family in Bethlehem. In Judea. In the hill country of Judea is where his cousin John came from. And they might have gone to visit Joseph's family in Bethlehem. So maybe you all have gone to visit other neighborhoods. Maybe you visited relatives or friends in other neighborhoods and noticed that they're different. Mm. Patrick is noting that if he grew up in Jesus's neighborhood, he wouldn't know anything about YouTube or about video. I know it's funny, isn't it? Um, but presumably you'd know all about other kinds of things. Like, I don't know, you might own a donkey and know all about how what donkeys do, or you might know all about figs. Um, you might be learning about construction and building things like Jesus probably learned from Joseph. Yeah, JT is saying you might know about carpentry. I wonder if you'd know about traveling through the desert. You would probably learn to read and write because that's what kids did in the synagogue. And it was very important for them to learn that so that they could take part in worship at the synagogue. And Marion notes that you might know all about sheep. Hmm. Matt is wondering if, with the way Jesus traveled around, um, Matt's wondering if Jesus ever felt nervous about visiting new neighborhoods. Yeah. And, you know, Jesus did go to a lot of different neighborhoods all the time. And sometimes he would leave a neighborhood because conditions were not going to be so great there for a while. We know from reading the Gospels that Jesus made decisions about when to go where all the time. Like when he got a message about his friends in, is it Bethesda? No, Bethsaida. He thought about when he should go there. But we also know that Jesus hung out and made friends with all kinds of people all over. Patrick is noting that both kids and grown-ups only have limited control over their neighborhood. They can paint their house red, but they can't make their neighbors paint their houses red. And there are actually neighborhoods that try to control what colors houses have, which seems to me a strange and odd thing, but different neighborhoods can be very different. Okay, well, it's time to say goodbye now. And we can all raise our hands if we want to and say peace to each other, or type peace in the chat, or say thanks be to God. Whatever way you like to say goodbye, go right ahead. And JT is wishing us all peace be with you, and peace be with you all. Peace. Yes, thanks be to God.